Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All That Remains or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by TrueFreak89, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Angela.
All That Remains, Chapter 1. The auditorium was full as General Sarah Alder stepped onto the podium. She approached the lectern with her shoulders squared and her jaw set. Her eyes narrowed as she looked out over the rows and rows of admiring young women facing her. In the very center of the room sat Private Rael Collar, with Abigail Bellwether and Tally Craven on either side of her. She and her unit had worked hard to make it to War College. It was the first day, and the air buzzed with nervous excitement as the chatter died away, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Alder cleared her throat, even though she already had the full attention of everyone in the room. Ladies, welcome to War College. You have all performed admirably in basic. Now is the start of your journey to become officers, proud leaders and defenders of this great nation. You're all storm and fury. The auditorium erupted as hundreds of pairs of booted feet pounded against the floor in applause. Rael's feet were the only ones that remained still. Alder's words rang hollow in her heart. She didn't feel proud to be there. She felt numb. Alder continued, her voice rising above the deafening sound of the stamping. It is the first day of your future, a future fighting for the American people. The future is coming, Rael Collar, and it will consume you. The pounding stopped. Rael sat facing forward, a cold sweat running down her spine as snarls and groans started up all around her. She swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on Alder as a mounting feeling of dread rose within her. Frozen to the spot with fear, Rael turned her head to the left to face Abigail. Her skin was the color of ash, her jaw slack, and her eyes were vacant and covered in a dull white film. Rael's heart was pounding in her chest in time to the rapid stamping as it picked up again. She turned to the right and found Tally looking much the same. Skin pale and waxy, eyes vacant, and her pupils covered in the same dull white film. Her unit gone. Rael was utterly alone in a sea of the dead. While Alder looked down on her from the podium, her fists clenched and her nails digging into the wooden lectern so hard they bled. Her eyes darkened, becoming bottomless black pits, as her lips turned up into a grim smile. The future is coming for you, Rael. The pounding stopped again, only to be replaced by a terrible shrieking. It sounded like nails running down a chalkboard. Rael was too scared to move, to cover her ears. She couldn't tear her eyes away from Alder, even as every fiber in her body screamed for her to run. The future is coming, and it is hungry! As if on cue, Tally and Abigail pounced, razor-sharp teeth and fingers like claws trying to rip her apart as the rest of the auditorium flooded in, all trying to consume her. Rael screamed. She sat bolt upright, a thin sheen of sweat covering her entire body as her shoulders sagged and she realized it was all a nightmare. She was safe in her dorm at Iron Mountain, the emergency underground base that had been her home for the last 14 months. It was one of the last bastions of the American military. Like their dorm back at Fort Salem, Rael and Telly shared bunk beds, while Abigail slept in a single bed across from them. Telly pulled guard duty last night, keeping watch up on the surface. The base had been built deep into the mountain outside Dighton, Massachusetts. Built as a fallout shelter, it was meant to serve as a short-term emergency shelter for military personnel and high-ranking government officials in the event of national disaster, such as a terror attack or an invasion on American soil. It protected them on 3 sides, with a single entrance leading to a service elevator. An electric fence and numerous guard towers covered the perimeter. Its makers never could have predicted it would house some of the last of humanity after the world ended. In the space between their beds, Abigail was already awake and doing push-ups. The dorm was like the one they'd shared at Fort Salem, furnished with 3 beds, footlockers, and a closet for their meager possessions, and a shared desk and chair. The communal bathrooms were down the hall. It wasn't the height of luxury, but it was more than most people had these days. Rael felt grateful just to have a roof over her head and to get 3 square meals a day. Abigail had stopped exercising and was watching Rael closely as she wiped at her face with a towel she had around her neck. "Having nightmares again?" she asked, her tone sympathetic. There was a time when she and Rael were at each other's throats from the moment they opened their eyes until they closed them again to go to sleep. All that had changed, though, along with the world around them. Rael nodded. Her throat felt dry, like she'd swallowed a whole desert in her sleep. It was a common occurrence thanks to the recycled air pumped around the subterranean base. She took a sip from the glass of water resting on the footlocker by the side of her bed. "Nights when I don't have them have become the exception." "Alder trying to eat you again?" Abigail teased, trying to lighten the mood. "You know, that's gotta be some kind of metaphor." "It was just you and Tell this time," Rael laughed, pushing the bed covers away before wiping at her face with her hands. The other girl shrugged. "That just means you've got great taste. And you need to get laid." Abigail took a seat on the end of her own bunk, crossing her bare legs at the ankles. "You haven't had any since Beltane, and that was back in basic. 2 years is a long time to go without getting laid." "Not a lot of options on the base, abs." Rael had lost count of how many times they'd had this exact conversation before. "I just hope my dreams aren't prophetic." "Tally's a seer. Stick to what you're good at, fixer," Abigail said with a grin. Rael flipped her off, but it was like water off a duck's back. Abigail already had her back to Rael as she pulled on her uniform. "Come on, we better get dressed if we want any breakfast." She and Rael finished dressing in their standard uniform, black cargo pants, plain gray t-shirts, and gray tactical jackets. The world might have ended, but the military still had a dress code. Rael put her little finger through a hole in her sleeve. Her uniform looked the worse for wear these days. Once they were both dressed, they made their way to the mess hall to meet Tally for breakfast. It was a little after 6 in the morning, so her shift on what should have ended. It was difficult to tell morning from night in the base. No natural light came in so deep underground, just fluorescent lights designed to mimic it and stop their bodies from developing a deficiency in vitamin D. Rael missed having windows. Sometimes she could spend days at a time without seeing the surface or the sun. Despite the world ending, life went on in the base. They passed children playing in the hallways and civilians and witches alike on their way to or from work. Everyone had a purpose within Iron Mountain. The military kept the civilians safe, and the civilians took up the roles to keep the base running. Those too sick or too old to work were excused. But every able-bodied person was expected to pull their weight. Because of this, the base was a thriving community in and of itself. It was a lot more than what was left up top. Tally was waiting for them in the mess hall when they got there. She waved at them from their usual table. The hall contained 10 long tables with space for 15 people to sit on each side of the table. The base held just under 260 people, though it could house 300 comfortably and 400 at a stretch. They were always looking for survivors, offering sanctuary to anyone they came across. The mountain had plenty of space to accommodate new people, but their supplies were running thin. Scavenging was a way of life at Iron Mountain. Rael and her unit usually found themselves assigned to supply runs, tasked with finding people and any food or supplies that could prove useful to the base. Most of the people they came across were civilians. Other witches were holed up in similar bases across the country, or dead from trying to do their duty, protecting their precious nation and the civilians who eagerly sent them off to fight in their wars. Witch numbers were low before the world fell to shit, but they were even worse now. Witchkind was on the brink of extinction, and mankind followed closely behind. Rael and her unit had been in their first year of war college when it happened, when the infection ravaged the world. The infection mostly spread through being bitten by one of the infected, but contact with any kind of their bodily fluids could cause infection. An open wound in a fight with one of them was a death sentence. The people who caught it were technically still alive, in some sense, but there was nothing left inside of them. No trace of humanity remained. They called the infected freakers. The nickname came from early in the infection, where people appeared to freak out with rage and attack at random, spreading the infection and growing their numbers. Their primary goal seemed to be to spread the infection at any cost, but Rael had seen firsthand what had happened when enough of them got together. Swarms, as they called them, acted as a collective, consuming anyone and everyone in their path. The infection first appeared 18 months ago. It took over America in a month, and most of the world soon after that. Russia was the only nation left untouched by the ravages of the infection. They had been sending some aid and troops overseas at first, but they were fighting a losing battle on all sides, and their defenses were strained. Alder expected them to fall any day, and with them would go America's last ally in the war against the infected. They were on their own. Iron Mountain was one of the last strongholds of humanity in the USA, and run by General Alder herself. She had negotiated the Salem Accord, the pact which conscripted all witches into the service of the United States military, and the reason Rael had been at Fort Salem when the infection broke out. Fort Salem lasted longer than most other places, given the sheer number of witches within it and the various protections on its grounds, but eventually, like the rest of America, it fell. It had been a massacre. Rael and her unit had been some of the lucky ones to get out. Out of the hundreds of cadets that had been in their year at War College, less than 24 survived to move with Alder to the Iron Mountain. The day Fort Salem fell replayed itself over and over in Rael's nightmares, like a horror movie on loop. The witches who were left alive scattered to countless bases across the country, but their numbers were severely depleted. Of the almost 260 people within the base, less than half of them are witches. The two women serving breakfast were both civilians. Rael and Abigail grabbed a tray and stood in line, waiting to be served. Rael wasn't sure it was worth the wait when one of the women hefted a scoop of lumpy porridge on her tray, and the other gave her 2 saltines. A glass of squash completed her dismal breakfast. It was a sign of how low their supplies were running. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'd kill for a piece of fruit right now, Rael said with a wistful sigh. Same, Abigail agreed with her, looking just as disheartened by the contents of her own tray. They walked across the mess hall, greeting fellow witches and civilians alike on their way to where Tally sat waiting for them. Hey, Tell, how was watch? Abigail took a seat across from the redhead, while Rael slipped around to the other side of the table and sat beside her. Tally had already finished eating and nursed a lukewarm mug of tea in her hands. Quiet. We didn't spot any freaker activity within a mile of us, which is good, said Tally. She took a sip of her tea and winced. We really need to find more tea today. I'm pretty sure this is just milk and water. You're coming out today? I thought it was your day off. You just got off duty. Abigail frowned, stabbing at her porridge with her spoon like it had offended her. Rael took a bite out of hers and screwed her face up. She'd eaten cardboard that tasted better. I put my name down for the scavenging party. I can't let you guys go out there on your own. Who would stop you bickering all day? We wouldn't, Anacostia, Abigail answered, cutting Rael off with a dismissive wave of her hand. See? Tally said, triumphant that they'd proved her point for her as Rael scowled at Abigail. Abigail rolled her eyes. You should go enjoy your day off, Tal. Get some rest. You're working yourself too hard. Abigail's right. You guys, I'm fine. Besides, we're a unit. We go together. Unit unity! Tally placed her hand in the middle of the table and waited for the other two girls to join in. They did, each placing their hands on top of the other and repeating Tally's rallying cry, albeit with less enthusiasm. Rael might be taking that a little far, Abigail said, shooting the blonde a grin. She was dreaming about us eating her again. She waggled her eyebrows suggestively while Tally laughed and slung an arm around Rael's shoulder. Aw, Ray, I'd be more than happy to give you a charge and make you all shiny. Rael shoved Tally's arm away with a grumble. My mark is still shiny, Tal. It doesn't go dull again just because I haven't had any for a while. That's not how it works. Speaking of shiny, Abigail coughed into her hands as Officer Graves approached their table. Graves was a necro and often assigned to their scavenging party. Necros had a unique ability among witches to control the infected and keep them from swarming and attacking, but their influence was limited. A single necro could only keep a handful of the infected at bay at any one time. Helen Graves was also the woman Rael slept with during Beltane 2 years ago. She got assigned to most of the unit's supply runs. Tally and Abigail took it as deliberate on Graves' part, but Rael couldn't see it, no matter how much Graves flirted with her. At ease, ladies, she said, as the unit sat up to attention in response to her presence. She stole a sideward glance at Rael as she addressed the three of them. I just came to tell you we're leaving at 07:30. We've picked the nearest town clean, so we're going to have to go further afield. Rael wasn't surprised to hear that. Their supplies were at an all-time low, and they seemed to be edging further and further from the base with every scavenging run. How far out? Rael asked. They had vehicles and the gas to run them, but the roads were often clogged and difficult to maneuver. Depending on how many freaks they run into, it might take half a day just to go 5 miles. 10 miles, Graves answered, her attention directly on Rael as she offered her a hesitant smile. As if reading her mind, she added, Anacostia took a scout team ahead yesterday. The roads are pretty clear, but it could be an overnight job if we can't find enough. Freakers were known to be more active during the night and when it was overcast with foul weather. There was something about the cold and the dark that they liked. If the supply run ran too late in the day, they'd be much safer bunkering down for the night than trying to head back to the base in the dark. We'll be up top for 0700, said Abigail. Right. See you all then. Graves gave a nod, with one last glance in Rael's direction. She turned and made her leave. Rael sat hunched over her breakfast tray, ignoring Tally and Abigail's pointed looks and whispered murmurs. Eventually, they moved on to another topic of conversation, leaving Rael to sulk in peace. 10 miles out, things must be getting desperate, Abigail huffed. We seem to find less and less when we're out there, supplies and survivors. Despite their young age, the Bellwether unit regularly went on supply runs. Their first deployment had been during City Drop, the exam for entering War College, when spree terrorists transporting a weapons cache had been identified, and the recruits in Anacostia were the closest to them. They had lost classmates that day, but the number paled in significance to how many they'd lost at the fall of Fort Salem. At barely 20 years old, their unit had experienced more loss and violence than most seasoned witches. I'm working with some necros and civilians to start a small farm up top. We're planting trees and crops and stuff. Tally sounded as upbeat as ever. She was always trying to look on the bright side, while the rest of her unit were more grounded in reality. Abigail and Rael shared a look, silently agreeing that encouraging Tally would be better than the alternative. That's great, Tal, said Abigail. Yeah, sounds good, Rael chimed in. Tally beamed at them both. I'm glad you guys think so, because I put your names down to volunteer. She clapped her hands together like an overly excited toddler, while Rael and Abigail shared an exasperated look. We need to put roots down for the future, start thinking about living and not just surviving. Speaking of surviving, has Hillary let you play with Garrett yet? Abigail asked, her tone playful despite the sensitive subject. Tally's expression soured in response. Hillary was the fiancée of Tally's former boyfriend, Garrett Buttonwood. They had hooked up at Beltane the same year as Rael slept with Graves. It was only later that Tally found out that he was already engaged to another high Atlantic like him, at the wedding of Abigail's cousin. Tally had called things off with him, but the lovers had found themselves drawn together again on more than one occasion. That was until his fiancée found out about them. Hillary hadn't been so fussed by his infidelity. She'd been more bothered about being left out. She was fine with Garrett and Tally hooking up, but only if she could join. Tally flat out refused to let it happen, and she and Garrett had been dancing around each other ever since. He was one of the few male witches on base, most having perished when Fort Salem became overrun with infected. You should go for it, Abigail shrugged in her nonchalant way. You'll get some, and Hillary is kinda hot. I don't swing that way. No offense, Ray. None taken, said Rael. Wait. Abigail's eyes lit up as she looked at the rest of her unit. Rael should fuck Hillary! That way, Hillary still gets her, and you and Garrett can hook up all you want. She grinned like she just solved the problem of world peace, while Rael pulled a face. What? No. Come on, Ray, be a team player and take one for the unit. You could even invite Graves. What's that phrase? 2 girls, 1 strap? Please don't finish that sentence. Rael winced, pushing away her breakfast tray. Hillary's hot, but I'm not getting involved in that mess. Not even for Tally. Sorry, Tal. It's okay. I wouldn't ask that of you, Rael. Tally touched a hand to her shoulder and noticed her watch. We should get going or we'll be late. We still need to grab our kits from the dorm. Abigail pushed her own tray away, letting Tally stack all 3 in the middle of the table. You're right. We wouldn't want Rael to be late for her girlfriend, she teased. Rael set her jaw with a scowl. For the last time, you guys, Graves is not my girlfriend.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.